Hi, my name is Michelle Mowdy. I am a developer advocate at SAP, experienced with front-end development and popular front-end frameworks in connection with SAP products. The presentation you are about to see is something I created last year on state management and how to add it to React apps using Redux. I will walk you through what state management is, what Redux is, why you would use it, how you would use Redux, and how you could simplify the use of it with Redux Toolkit. The code for this presentation has been moved into a different repo from where it was last year. This new repo contains the code for this and other Redux-based presentations, so be sure to check it out and the README for more information. If you would like to follow along and code with me, you can pull the repo shown here and link in the description below. But be sure to switch to the State Management Intro main branch to get started, as that contains the code as it was when this presentation was originally recorded. The other two branches, starting with State Management Intro, contain the code for basic Redux and Redux Toolkit with added notes for reference, so be sure to take a look. Further, I recommend installing the Redux DevTools extension for Chrome and Firefox so you can get better visibility into how the state is being mutated as we perform actions. You'll see me use this tool several times throughout the presentation. With that, let's start learning about Redux.
So what is Redux? Before we can really talk about what Redux is, we need to know what state management is. And to put it simply, state management is a design pattern that deals with how data is handled throughout an application. This deals with everything from data that's being inputted from an input field to data that's being grabbed from an API and how all that data is shown and manipulated throughout the application. This design pattern can make managing data incredibly easy, but can also be very difficult to implement. So that's where Redux comes in. So Redux is a state management tool that allows us to store data in a centralized place and manipulate that data in a way that is safe and consistent. So it consists of a store that is updated via a reducer called on by actions sent out through a dispatcher. And I do think it's important to note that the reducers have to update the store in an immutable way. So we have to send in a brand new state every time we update the state to keep us from mutating the original object in a way that's not propagated throughout the entire application. So to give an example of how this works, if a user clicks a button that updates the state, that will call the action with that data that will then be dispatched into a reducer, and the reducer will take that data sent in by the action and return a brand new state with that updated data. When that state is updated, any view or component that uses that updated data will then re-render with the new data. That means that all the components will have the exact same data in real time without you having to worry about some components using old data and some components using the new data, or components manipulating or updating the old data. So why would you use Redux? Redux is not really something that's designed for small applications, things that don't have a lot of data or that are only have a few pages, stuff like that. It's designed for large-scale applications like what we see in business software. Applications that have many different screens and many different features and data coming from all different kinds of APIs, and that data being updated in all kinds of different places and needing to be shown in its most up-to-date form on a bunch of different pages. That's where Redux comes in. So in order to really understand why you would use it, let me show you the example that we're going to go through today. So this is a profile. This is Amanda Smith's profile with a sidebar over here. We've got our header over here with this phone number. We've got a personal information with Amanda Smith's name, her role, and an email. And then we've got this contact information section here with a phone number, work number, and home address. Now we can click on this button and open up a dialog that will allow us to edit the values in contact information. So let's edit this work phone number and see that it does update the data and contact information. Unfortunately, if you noticed, the work phone up here did not update. Now that was a conscious decision made by me. I knew that it would be quite complicated to attach these two pieces of data together without the use of Redux. And since I knew I was going to be implementing Redux, I just decided to hard code that value for now, and I'll show you how to connect those two later. So let's take a look at the component structure of this application to kind of get an idea of how the data is flowing currently and how Redux can help us improve it. So we've got our application here with the nav bar, the profile header, which had the work phone number that we need to connect to our other data, the profile sidebar, and the profile details. Inside profile details is our personal information and our contact details. This is where all of the data currently lives. And this contact edit dialog is the pop-up that you saw that allows us to edit the data and show that updated data on contact details. So if we wanted to add that phone number up to profile header, we couldn't really do that in the way that the code is written now because I've hard-coded that data. If we wanted to, we would have to put that data in the closest common parent component between the two of these components. So that would be our application. Now, application doesn't care about our phone number. It doesn't use it, it doesn't see it, it doesn't want to have it there. But in order for us to see it here and here, we have to have the data there. So for profile header to get it, it's great, it's simple, it's easy. You just send it down one level. In order for contact details and by extension contact edit dialog to see that phone number, we have to send it through profile details, which doesn't care about it, to contact details, which does actually care about it, and then to contact edit dialog, which also cares about it. Now, if we wanted to actually update that value that's stored in our app, we can't just have a function here and update it here like we do currently. We would have to have that update function here on the app level, right? So we would have to send it through to profile details and then down to contact edit details. Neither of these two care about it, and then we have to send it down to contact edit dialog. This is really complicated. It involves components that don't really need to have this data or this function, and it can be vastly improved by implementing Redux. So when we implement Redux, we will have our store here with our data. Whoops, there's a bad hash mark, ignore that, and our function to update that data. So if profile header and contact details and contact edit dialog want that phone number, all they have to do is ask for it, and the data is just sent along. Now, if we want to update that data, we no longer have to send it through multiple different components that don't need that update function. We just send it in right here to our contact edit dialog, and then it updates the data, sends that updated data back. The reducer will then do what needs to be done, update and return a brand new store with that updated data, and then that data will be sent to the profile header, contact details, and contact edit dialog. So all of those things will be updated at the same time. There's no more old phone number being seen here because we didn't update it. So now that you know what Redux is and why you would use it, the next question to answer is how you would use it. Redux officially comes in two different forms. We have Basic Redux over here and Redux Toolkit over here. Basic Redux has everything you need to add state management to your application, but can include a lot of boilerplate and small things to remember that can make it difficult to use and learn. The answer to some of those problems was Redux Toolkit. It is essentially a wrapper around Redux that automatically handles many of the things that were complaints with Basic Redux. An example of this would be immutable state. Redux requires an immutable state, but it can be an easy thing to forget to handle. Redux Toolkit takes care of that through the use of immer, which automatically detects when the state is updated and returns a new state. However, it is still important to learn Basic Redux. It is the form of Redux most commonly used and likely to be encountered in the wild. It is also important to learn to have a better understanding of how Redux is actually working, which Redux Toolkit can abstract away. So in this demo, I will briefly walk you through the code as it is without state management, and then show you how to add both Redux and Redux Toolkit to a repo that hasn't implemented either. So let's start with Basic Redux first. Here is the starting point of the application. You can see that it's just a basic app with a couple different components. We've got our profile header here, which has the work number in it, and we've got the profile details, which contains our contact details, which has all of our data right now. Let's take a look at profile header and see what that looks like. So profile header is incredibly simple. We've got just our work number up here that is currently hard-coded, and it's just a couple spans and a flex box, and you can see our work number being formatted here. Contact details, on the other hand, is a little bit more complicated. So we've got our data being initialized here. So this is contact details, and we're using hard-coded data right now because in a normal application, this would probably be sent in through an API call when the application initializes, but because it's just an example, I've got all of our data hard-coded here. We've also got our work number, our phone number, and the address here. If you notice, the address is just contact details as it is. This isn't really exactly what we want to be sending into address because the contact details, if you notice, has the phone number and the work number there. So eventually when we work on our selectors, and I will describe that later, we will parse out just what we need for the address. The other thing is this function right here, which is the function that updates our data. You notice that it takes in this set contact details function, which is going to be used to update the contact details variable. And this, even though contact details doesn't really care how things are updated because the data lives here, this is where the function needs to be. After we add Redux, this function will actually be moved to contact edit dialog. And so let's take a look at contact edit dialog right now. So as you can see, we have all of our parameters for the dialog being sent in as props. Our handle input change, as we just saw, is also being sent in as props. These two things don't really need to be props. They can just be coming from Redux itself. So let's get started adding Redux. Now the first thing we need to do is obviously install the frameworks, which we can do here. We need to add both Redux and React Redux. Oops, misspelled that. Because Redux can work on its own without React at all. But if we're going to use it with React, as this application is written in React, we need to add that framework as well. So it's been installed, and let's start with our reducer. Now we're going to start with a very basic reducer at the start of this. We don't want to add anything too complicated. We just want to make sure that our reducer and our store is all hooked up to our application, and we can see that data on the front end in our Redux DevTools extension. So when I'm using basic Redux, I like to house most of my Redux in a common place, especially when I only have one reducer, which this application will have. So that's why I have this folder here named Redux. And we're going to create our reducer file. So this is where all of the logic for our store updating and our state is going to be. And I'm going to copy and paste a lot of code, but I'll describe it after I copy and paste. So this is just the basic code that you need to get a reducer working. You have our initial state here, which is just hello world, because I am a developer and I follow the rules. And then we have a reducer, which gets sent state. And in the first time this happens, it's going to be empty, so we'll have our initial state here, and then we will get sent an action. Now, actions happen when we actually want to update the data and return different data to the state. But because we're just starting out for the first time, we're not going to be sending in any action. So in this switch, we're going to just return a default state. The next thing we need to do is create our store. And our store is mostly created from the reducer that we've just made and also the create store from Redux. If you'll notice, there is this code right here. This is to get our Redux DevTools extension to work. It's not actually needed in this code right here isn't actually needed with Redux Toolkit because it is automatically set up with the wrapper around Redux. So with that, that is the third piece that we need to set everything up. And the last piece is to send in the store to the application itself. So to do that, we will be using the provider as provided by React Redux, and we'll use the store that we have just created and wrap our app in the provider that is sent in the store. This means that everywhere within the application, we will be able to access the store, the reducers, the functions, everything that we need. So if we save that and we start our application, everything should be working properly. And you notice here it says no store found. When this refreshes, we should actually have some actual UI here. And you can see it's loaded now. So we've got our init. That is the store being initialized. And we can see we have our hello world in our state. With that, we can actually start adding some real data and connecting our application to the store itself. So first things first, let's uncouple our contact edit dialog from our contact details. Those two are very tightly bound together with the update function being sent in from contact details and the actual contact details, the data itself also being sent in. So let's move both of those things to contact edit dialog. And the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to add a selector to our reducer. So a selector is essentially just a function that grabs data from our state. And it is written like this. We have our function name, and we get sent a state into the function, and we grab just the data that we want and return that back. Now for our state, I'm going to just copy and paste the state that we want to use. This is essentially the same thing that we have in contact details, but I have wrapped it in the contact details object just to compartmentalize that data. I have also edited the endings for a few of these things just so that we can see when our state is actually working. It is different from the data that we had in the beginning. So we can save that, and now we've got our initial state. And if you would like to see on when we refresh this, our initial state is going to look a lot different than it did before with that hello world. So let's grab our contact details in contact edit dialog and stop using these props. So to do this, we need to use a function called use selector, and this is provided by React Redux. And I will paste that import here. It is a very simple function. All it does is it takes our contact details selector and sends in the state. Because if you remember, we were getting sent in the state, but we don't actually have access to the state from our contact edit dialog. So the selector, the use selector function provides that for us. And it is called like this. So we got use selector, get contact details, and now all of this info right here will be retrieved from our state. So let's save that, and we will go and refresh. We'll open it up, and now you can see that we've got our hundreds, thousands, and our A. But it's no longer updating our contact information, and that's because our contact information isn't grabbing that data from state. But before we do that, let's go ahead and move our handle input change function into our contact edit dialog and just fully remove and separate contact details from contact edit dialog. So let's go ahead and just grab this whole function, even though we'll cause a few errors along the way. And we'll remove this prop because we no longer need it. So what is happening here is we have this function that updates the old React state. What we need to do in our reducer is write a reducer and an action that will update our state. So let me go and grab that code right now, and I will describe to you what it does. Okay, so we have here our action, which is the update contact details function. It is of type update contact details, and it takes in a payload, which is an object of name and value, right? And in our reducer, we now have an actual case instead of just default. When this is dispatched by our dispatch, it gets sent to our reducer with the action that we return here. So the action type for us is update contact details, and our payload, which you can see here, is name and value. So what this part is doing right here is it is copying our old state and returning it with the new value. So we have our old state spread or copied right above this, and then we have our contact details objects, and we need to make sure that we also spread and copy our old contact details and only update the value that we want to update. And then we return it, and then it will get updated in the store. So we will save this. And now we will implement the code in contact edit dialog. So I'm just going to copy again, and so please hold short. So what we're doing here is we're using this dispatch to dispatch this action with our payload object. So that is the name and the value of the input field that has changed. So the name is the name of the field, the value is the value. Kind of self-explanatory there. But we're sending it into this action. And as I described before, this action then returns this object here, and the dispatcher sends that into this reducer, which connects it to the correct case statement and then returns the state to the store, and everything gets updated. So if we save this and I have done everything correctly, this should now update in the store. Refreshing might help. Yes, so as you can see now, we have our update contact details action that has been dispatched, and you can see that the phone number was changed from ending in 1000 to ending in 1234. So that is now connected. And we fully separated our contact details from our contact edit dialog. So the next thing we need to do is separate our contact details from all of the state that's just being stored here, because we want to be able to use some of that data in profile header. And as the data is actually already in the store, all we need to do now is just grab it. So to do that, we will add some selectors. And the selectors can be as simple as this, or they can be much more complicated depending on how you want the data sent back into the into your component. So we'll take the get address selector for an example. In this, we are returning a brand new object that just has the data that we want. So we just want street, apartment, city, state, and zip code for our address. We don't need the work number or the phone number. So we take the state and we return just what we need. In this case, it's very simple. In other cases, it can be like adding an ID to an array of objects or manipulating that data in some way to maybe you want all of the number of items in a list in your array, but you don't really want to just store that number in the state. So all you do is grab the list count. This is what selectors are for. So I also want to point out we now have a selector just for phone number and a selector just for work number. And with that saved, we will now add that to these fields here. And When we do this, we can actually go and remove this contact details here as soon as we remove it from our dialog. We need to add our imports, and with that, everything should start working. We no longer need this data because it's now been moved to Redux, so after just cleaning up the code a little bit, everything should start working properly. So we'll save, we will refresh, and now you can see that this is updated with the data from Redux. And when we go and update one of the values, it's updated here. So everything is now connected with Redux. The only thing that's not connected yet is with the work phone number. But as you can, I'm sure, guess, it is really simple now to add our data connection to there. All we need to do is grab a selector and use it, which we've already created the selector. We just need the work phone. So we've got our selector function here, our get work number function from our reducer, and we just set it to our variable, and there we go. We'll save, and now we can see it all working together. Oops, forgot to refresh. Now with this, I will add this to 1, 2, 3, 4, as I like to do there, and you can see it's updated here and here now. So there you have it. That was everything that we needed to do to connect the contact information to Redux, as well as the phone number in the profile header. After this, I will show you how to add Redux Toolkit and how to use Redux Toolkit. And you can kind of see the difference between how Redux Toolkit is set up versus how basic Redux is set up. So I have reset this repo back to where it was before we started adding any Redux in preparation for us adding Redux Toolkit. So as with Redux, the first thing that we need to do is install the frameworks that we need for Redux. In this case, we need the Redux.js Toolkit and React Redux just like before. So I'll go ahead and start installing that, and I will get started with the code. So you'll notice over here that I have actually kept open the reducer. When we're done, I will go ahead and compare and contrast the reducer, or the slice as it is in Redux Toolkit, with the reducer that we wrote for basic Redux, so you can kind of see the difference between the two if you haven't already during the coding of this. So let's start by adding the reducer, and we'll do that by actually adding it to where it's going to be used the most. So in this case, we're going to add it to profile. And we're going to call it profile slice because Redux Toolkit uses slices instead of the reducers that we had before. And we're placing it inside profile because Redux Toolkit has created a way to very quickly and easily add reducers to the store without having to add a bunch of extra code. Now, I never went over adding multiple reducers in the first part with just basic Redux, but if you ever look it up, you will see that it is a little bit more complicated than how Redux Toolkit has set it up. So because of that, I am adding our slice directly to where it would be used, which is in profile. And it's going to be the slice that would be used for profile details, profile header, and profile sidebar if they ever all needed state management. For our store, I'm going to be creating it inside source itself. And this is again due to the fact that because it is so much easier to add reducers, it makes more sense to have it in right next to where the index in the app is rather than inside a file that would just house the store, because the reducers are all now in the very close to where they're going to be used. So let's get started with the slice. I will grab the code that I have written for the hello world, and I will create that here. So right off the bat, you can see the differences between React and React Toolkit. Here you can see this create slice function is taking in an object with a bunch of different parameters for it. We've got our name, which is profile for profile slice. We have our initial state, which is going to be hello world in this case, and then we have an empty object for our reducers that we will add later. This means that all of this stuff is created in one fell swoop instead of having to have reducers as a separate function, our initial state as a separate object, or in a separate file as it is in some cases. It's all right here in this slice. And we export it by just exporting the reducer of the profile as our default. So with that, let it save, and I will go ahead and grab the store, and we can see the differences there between the old store and the new store. So here we use configure store. We just export it as a default, and it takes in an object that has a reducer object inside of it. So this is why it makes it so much easier to add multiple reducers to our store. All we need to do is add a new line to this reducer object and another reducer has been configured. It can be a lot more complicated with basic Redux, so this has been a definite improvement on what was already there. So I'm going to go ahead and save. It is important to note that this is how we're going to access our state when we get to our selectors. So just keep that in mind that when we start to call state.profile, it's coming from this name right here. And just as with our basic Redux, we're going to configure our store by wrapping the app with a provider and calling our store and adding it in there for the entire app to be able to use. Nothing has changed here. It's the exact same. So that's fantastic. I'll go ahead and close that. With this, we should actually be able to start our project and see our store working. So here we can see that we have initialized our state, and it's got our profile, which is from our reducer, and it's got our hello world in there. So that's fantastic. We've got everything set up. So let's start adding our actual state. And I'm going to do this in much bigger chunks than I did with Redux because you already kind of know how we're going to be adding this state to the code. It's set up a little bit differently with Redux Toolkit. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually add a selector here for this contact edit dialog. And I'm going to grab the initial state from the code and add it to the profile slice. We already know where that's coming from. It's coming from contact details, and we've edited it just a little bit so that we know when it's working and when it's not. So go ahead and save that. This is technically all that we need to do to start being able to access our data outside of the store. And that's because Redux Toolkit has taken away a lot of the boilerplate code that we needed to write. So I'm going to go ahead and add our selector for this line right here. Okay, you can see that I've added the selector here. It is really, really simple with Redux Toolkit. We use the same useSelector function, but now we don't have to create a separate function within the reducer or the reducer file. We can just call the state directly from the component that we needed. This means that we don't have to add the extra code. We can just grab what we need where we need it. And it's a lot easier to maintain that way. If you still have a preference for using selectors and coding out the selectors so that you don't have to care about what the object looks like in the state, you can still do so, and I will even give you an example of that when we get to the address selector in contact details. Now for the next thing, let's go ahead and add our handle input change function. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy it from the code that I have already written. I'm not going to copy it from contact details. So it's pretty much the same as what you saw before. Update contact details, name, value, and I will add my missing imports here and the missing use dispatch. So with that, we can save, and let's go and add our update contact details reducer to our slice. And this is where things get really different from how they were done in Redux. As I said before, with Redux Toolkit, it uses a framework called Immer to automatically return us a immutable state. So before, where we had to spread our state out into a new object and return that, we no longer have to do that. Also, we can simply create a function here without having to write the code for an action. So let's just show you what a reducer looks like with Toolkit. So here it is. We have our update contact details function here. We have our state and our action, and the action no longer has a type on it because we don't need one with Redux Toolkit. We have the payload, which is the object that was sent into this function is now a payload automatically, and that's how I set up Redux as well. So you have the name and the value. It's very similar to how it was done before, but we don't have to spread out the state, which is fantastic. The other thing we need to do is create our actions. Now they're created a lot differently than how they were before. Now all we need to do is use a function that's created on top of our slice with this create slice. We add the name of the reducer and we say export const reducers equals profile slice actions. This creates all of the actions that we will ever need. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. And this means that everything should be hooked up and we can go and see it in our application now. So I'm going to open this up and I'm going to go ahead and change this. And we see here that we have an action that has been dispatched. It is written slightly differently than before because we didn't include our own string for the action type. It just uses the slice name and the name of the reducer function that was called. You can see that it does the same thing. It shows you the old state with the new state. So now I'm going to show you how we can still write selectors in the slice. Now the one that we're going to write is our get address selector that we had before, except now we're going to call it select address. That is the best practice for naming convention for selectors with Redux Toolkit. So here we have pretty much the same function here, and I'll show you. For our selector, we have get address here and select address here. I have pulled this out just because this is such a long pathway to get to the contact details, and it's the same street, apartment, city, state, and zip code. So I'm going to save this, and in contact details, let's go ahead and call our function. And we can also write our work number and our phone number selectors at the same time. So I'm going to add our imports here. And I'm going to add our address selector. It's as simple as that. And for our phone number, we will grab our use selector function. And for work number, we're going to do the same thing. And remember, these can be done inline or done in the profile slice. So I'm going to save. Let's go ahead and add our same selector to work number. You can obviously see that it will work the same way as it did in contact details, but let's just go ahead and do it just to see everything working properly together, because that's always nice and satisfying to see. So I'm going to save this. Going to refresh. You can see that it's at the 00. I'll open this up. I'll edit this. And now we can see that everything is editing properly. And that is all that we needed to do to add Redux Toolkit to our application. You could tell it was a lot easier, a lot simpler. There was a lot less code that needed to be written. And for reference, we can see, the differences between the two of these. We've got our initial state here while our initial state is in here. We have all of these selectors to grab the state while we only needed one for Redux Toolkit. And for actions, we needed to create all of this code for an action when instead we just used the Redux Toolkit function to return our action. And our reducer is now just a single line of updating an object value. So one more thing I wanted to note is that in the store itself, before I had pointed out that there was this Redux DevTools extension code that was created within the store for basic Redux, but now Redux Toolkit has taken care of that already, which is why we never needed to add any of that code just to get everything to show up in our DevTools extension. So that is everything that there is for Redux Toolkit for this example. I would like to thank you for watching and following along with this demo of Redux. I hope you have learned what Redux is, why you would use it, how you can use it, and how you can improve the use of it with Redux Toolkit. I hope the comparison between Redux and Redux Toolkit has helped you decide if Redux is the right framework for state management for your own projects, and I hope this presentation has helped you learn how to better read and contribute to Redux code that might already exist in projects you're currently working on. If y'all have any questions or need any help, feel free to reach out to me at any time, and I will do my best to answer. Thank you for watching, have a nice day, and happy coding!